My name is David Carradine, and
Hi, my name's Paul Hart, and in 1994, myself and my longtime companion, Gari Jenkins, began a journey that was to take us halfway around the world, and to take us both to new heights, quite literally. We were invited to take part in an expedition to climb 2 peaks in the western Himalayas, on the border of India, Tibet and China. Gary and I had both been to altitude before, but neither of us had any experience of the Himalayas, and Gary had never climbed before. I was to act as a medic, and Gary, who's an excellent skier, was going as the principal skier. We were to meet the organiser, Adrian Legnardo, and the rest of the team at a base camp in the Chandra region of northern India at the foot of the Bari Shigri glacier. But first we had to get there. Our initial journey north proved to be more dangerous than either Gary or I had expected. When we weren't dodging other vehicles, we had to contend with a host of other problems. From roads that had been washed away, to bridges that threatened to collapse beneath us. But one of the best things about the trip was that we were able to experience all aspects of Indian life at first hand.
Hi, well we've just reached Patel and this is 13,500 feet. It's pretty hard on the old breathing because obviously the altitude is beginning to affect us, just having just come from 7,000 feet. It's taken us 6 hours to get up here from Manali, and as you can see the weather's changed considerably in that time, but this is home and this is what's keeping us going, the local tea. And the cooks and the porters are putting it all together at the moment.
We definitely feel the altitude. We're at 13,000 feet at the moment, just come up from about 8,000 feet. We can definitely feel the altitude.
And the cold.
And the cold.
I was in a t-shirt all the way up here.
And to definitely take a few days to acclimatise before we head on any further.
Which is exactly 12 hours until we start going up to 14,500 feet tomorrow morning. Still, it's all good for a laugh.
Gary and I both knew that we would suffer from the altitude that evening, as we had had little chance to acclimatise. In our meagre surroundings, we got our first taste of its more unpleasant effects.
How are you feeling this morning, Gary?
Oh, fairly rough this morning. Didn't get much sleep last night. I think it's still a combination of the altitude and the Delhi belly. But just persevere. It's only 4 hours walk this morning, so it shouldn't be too bad. I think slow and steady is going to win this race.
That morning we met with our porters for the first time. Sada, our horseman, who was unaffected by the altitude, happily set about his business of loading the horses and then guiding us to our first camp. As we stumbled along behind Sadder, all Gary and I could think about was our pounding heads and how sick we felt. When we had to cross a heavily swollen river by a particularly physical method, I could see Gary was less concerned with falling in and being washed away than the fact that his head was going to hurt even more. Our sorry appearance did, however, have one beneficial effect. Local goat herders took pity on us, and they offered us some refreshment in the form of goat milk tea. Despite the somewhat unusual taste and method of preparation, it was very gratefully received. However, not all goat dishes were quite so welcome.
Well, today was Gary's birthday, and we had a little celebration today. The goat herders just down the valley here found a goat which had been washed into the river and drowned.
A bloated goat.
Which they gave to our horsemen, who knew it was Gary's birthday, so they promptly cut it up and gave it to us for lunch today. Something of an unusual taste.
It was quite simply the worst meal I've ever had in my entire life. It was gopping. Absolutely gopping.
Luckily, they like their meat fairly raw here as well, so we had a few problems digesting it. With the best will in the world, we couldn't say exactly what we thought of it to them, so we made the usual signs and said thanks very much. It was very, very tasty. But I think we'll try and avoid that again. Although they have actually dried some, well, they're promising to dry some for us and take it to the top of the mountain when we head out tomorrow. I'm hoping it rains.
The following morning, Gary and I, along with our guide and porter, Turman, left the base camp and began the long and exhausting process of ferrying our equipment up the mountain. Both of us were still suffering with the altitude, and to make matters worse, Gary was still feeling the effects of his dally belly.
Cut.
When we arrived at the snout of the glacier, we were suddenly made aware of the job we had set ourselves. What had appeared as small humps from the base camp were in fact huge slopes of ice, often leading down into black crevasses. To make matters worse, the surface of the ice was covered with boulders and scree, making it extremely treacherous. For the next few days we were going to be ferrying our kit up the glacier, and the prospect of lifting heavy burgans up the slope was fairly daunting. Luckily, Tim and our porter was always on hand to produce a mug of tea at the end of each day.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tilo.
Shukriya. Shukriya.
Done your back.
However, the collection of the water fell to myself or Gary.
This is the glacier, and this is our drinking water. We have to come down into these little holes in the crevices in the actual glacier to get our drinking water. The problems we've got, as you can see, this is all falling apart behind me. The sun melts the glacier, the ice, and the rocks are tumbling in all the time. Slightly apprehensive about being here because we've been travelling up the sides of the valley, and the stuff has been tumbling down. We've had a couple of narrow shaves when large boulders have crossed our path, and as you can see, it's happening all the time. There's some fairly big boulders up there as well, and if they come down, we're going to know about it. Which, if you'll excuse me, is a fine time to get out of here.
Despite the dangers, the pools of water offer a chance to wash and clean clothing, as well as take that all-important bath,
in your entire life.
though melted ice water does have its drawbacks.
On your back, so around your back. You can see why I was nearly sick when I did it.
As we climbed higher each day, so the contrast in daytime and nighttime temperatures became more apparent, and so at each stage the camps became a little more uncomfortable.
We're on the biggest bit of ice in northern India. We are actually camping a couple of inches above the Shigri glacier. Have a look at this. This is where the tent is. Just need to sweep away a bit of rock, and right here, ice. Ice. Lots of it. Cut.
Finally, at 17,000 feet, Gary and I had our first meeting with Adrian, the rest of the group, and the rest of the porters. However, this meeting was to be a short one. As with winter snows approaching, it was essential that Gary and I started lifting the rest of the equipment up to the highest camp. So, the following morning, while the rest of the team started to sort kit, Gary and I began by lifting the first of the 70-pound loads of equipment up to the final glacial camp. It was from this point that we expected to make our attempt on the mountain proper.
Good. I reckon we're probably about halfway to the rock.
Mm-hmm.
While the going was initially easy, it soon became more difficult as we encountered more and more crevasses. This forced us to follow either a meandering path or involve ourselves in the exertion incumbent in leaping them. So it was that after several back-breaking days, Gary and I and the rest of the porters, and Adrian and Bob Newbury, were able to perform one final lift to move all the equipment up to the final camp. By the time we had finished, each of us was showing the effects of all the physical effort. As sunset fell, we were able to look back down the route that we had taken and also get our first look at the Great Shigri Wall.
Yeah, very nice. Nice colours.
Early the following morning, we again donned our Bergens and began our first ascent of the mountain proper. By this time, both Gary and I had lost in the region of 2 stone in body weight, and every step was a real effort. We were finding it more and more difficult to keep going. Our first camp was set up in bright sunlight, and we quickly discussed our plans for the following day over a hot cup of chai.
No, I'm quite happy.
However, we hadn't counted on the weather. Overnight there was a sudden snowfall, very unusual for so early in the year, and we wondered if this was a taste of things to come. The dangers of the area were again evidenced by the opening of fracture lines around our tent, but we were forced to stay where we were for 2 days. The bad spell cleared just as quickly as it had arrived, and so, early in the morning we set off for our final camp on the ridge just below the summit of Shigri Parbat. We set off in high spirits, thinking we could reach the ridge without too much problem. We anticipated only one difficult section, and that was a huge hanging snow face, overhanging a large crevasse which we had to cross. When we started, the weather was good, and it remained so until we began to set up a fixed rope system to get us around the danger area. Then suddenly it broke, and with almost disastrous results.
We arrived at this campsite yesterday evening in pretty atrocious conditions. We're at 20,000 feet or thereabouts, and we've got one last little spurt to do to complete our attempt on Shigri Parbat.
However, it was 2 days before the weather broke sufficiently enough for us to make an attempt on the summit. Sada and Bob, who were acting as one climbing pair, both became ill and had to return to the lower camps. So it was left to myself and Gary as one climbing pair, and Adrian and Terman as a second climbing pair, to make the attempt on the summit. We set off in the darkness of early morning, but the heavy snowfall made movement difficult, and several hours of hard climbing later, we were still some way from the top. So much to the We had made it to a particularly good vantage point, and we could see the route to the top. It looked achievable, and Adrian was keen to go. But with bad weather approaching, my concern was for the group's safety.
Stormy weather coming back down there, you know?
The ridge is going to be easy, but the last 400 foot, that ice climb, I don't want to do that today with this weather coming in.
It's very, very cold coming back down. And
Especially, yeah.
Shigri Parbat, you've got to see it on a clear day, yeah?
Well, just even for safety as well, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit of a bummer.
The longer I stay in tie-dye, the more tired I get, if you're quite honest. Hey?
Well, Gary and I'll stay on the ridge.
I think I'll go down to ABC too.
Bring up kit, and we'll ferry it from below the crevice.
Kit, more grub, more food, more rope, more ice screws.
And skis.
Skis. Okay.
And then we'll do it. We can do this, Well, yesterday's decision to come down from the peak, the attempt on the peak, was the right one. Because no sooner as we got back to the camp, then we were hit with what you can see around me. Whiteout conditions. It stopped snowing, and this is literally 24 hours later on. It stopped snowing now. It's not been snowing for about the past 10 minutes. But since yesterday afternoon, we've had 24 hours of snow. You can see the sort of snow build-up that we're getting, and it's becoming impossible to try and make our way now up towards the peak. Adrian and Termin have gone down to the last camp to rest. Because Gary and I were short of time, we decided to stay up on the ridge, hoping that it might break this morning and we could make a second attempt. That's not been the case. We've had a full 24 hours of snow. Last night I thought we were going to get blown off the ridge here. The winds must have been in excess of 80 miles an hour. It's been pretty horrific for most of the time we've been up here, to be honest. We're approaching the end of our time up here. We're not going to have much time to make a second attempt on the peak. And certainly I think now, with the conditions as they are now, with the fact that there's so much snow on the ground, avalanches is a major danger for us. I don't think we're going to get a chance to do it. Our only option now is to to really pack up and ski off the ridge. We can't ski today, we can't even see the ground. If you take a look up towards the peak, you can see the kind of conditions. If you follow me through, this is what we're trying to walk through to get up there. And this snow was whipped off when we set off yesterday. You can see the depth. We've had probably a foot or more of snow since yesterday. It's quite heartbreaking for myself and Gary because we've set our hearts on getting to the top of the peak. As I say, the only thing that's left for us now is to ski down. One of the things that's worried us as well is when I got back to the camp yesterday, I spoke to Adrian about stores of food, etc., because we set off for the peak yesterday on literally 5 spoonfuls of noodles. Adrian's under the impression that 100 calories a day will suffice at this altitude for making a tent on an 1,800 foot from this camp to the top of the peak. That's not my belief. The conditions are very, very cold. We spend most of the time that we're in our DOS bags shivering, and I think generally we should be looking at 3,000 or 4,000 calories per person per day up here. Adrian left us with the rest of the rations, which I'll grab out now. This is the bag of rations, and it consists of some tea making kit, and if I lay it down here, we've got about 8 packets of soup, which are about 50 calories a piece. These pasta choice meals, which again are fairly limited in calories, 400 calories. Gary and I have been surviving on, I would say, a maximum of 500 calories per day. The detrimental effects can be seen in both mine and Gary's loss in body weight and the fact that we're now starting to come with various rashes, itches, boils and bumps. Not Adrian's fault. I think just bad planning on the logistics of getting food and stuff up here. Certainly to come back and do it again, I plan for slightly different meal arrangements. But the one saving grace is that hopefully, all being well, although having got within 800 feet of the peak yesterday, probably not being able to attempt it again, we'll be able to ski down the mountain. And with this much snow, possibly all the way back to base camp. It did clear about 4 or 5 minutes ago, and there's been fairly heavy snow in the valley as well, right along the glacier. Although saying that, it's going to be quite difficult making our way back from the advanced base camp to the base camp. But it's been an experience, certainly.
Okay.
As it was, Gary and I had to spend another 7 days living in the tent, locked in by the weather. Despite the strain of living at the altitude and living in such confined proximity, we both managed to keep our sense of humour.
Holy. That's what it's been like
Just.
for the last 5 days. That's enough of that.
Feel better for that?
Yeah.
Began to be quite serious. Then, just as we were about to give up hope, the weather finally broke.
For 8 days now we've been stormed in up here, and this morning is the first time it's cleared. We're running pretty short of rations, and actually we're both quite weak now after 8 days essentially sat in the tent. It's our intention now to get down as quickly as possible. We're going to ski down, but there's a small peak, an unclimbed peak, which is adjacent to Shigri Parbat, and we're going to make an attempt at that and then ski off that. And that's we think that's at 21,050 feet. But let's just hope the weather stays like this for the next couple of hours. There you go. Yep. Yeah, it's time to get off, I think.
So off we set for the summit. Both of us were close to the point of exhaustion, and as we made our way through the deep snow, our physical reserves became more and more depleted. Every step was a massive effort, and the heavy rucksacks threatened to spin us off balance. Suddenly, we'd done it. Finally reached the summit. But our triumph was short-lived. Within minutes of reaching the top, the weather had again begun to close in. And now we were both tired. The visibility was getting restricted, and there were crevasses everywhere, and we now had to begin our ski descent. The heavy packs were a real burden now, especially for myself. Gary was by far a better skier, and I was struggling to keep upright. For me, it was survival skiing, and I was only just succeeding. 1,000 foot down, and with 3,000 foot to go, we were yet again forced to stop.
Well, we made it. We got to the top of the Unclimbed peak today. Both Paul and I managed to ski down from the Unclimbed peak through some pretty horrendous snow conditions. We only got about 1,000 feet down. We intended to go down about 4,000 feet. As you can hear outside, the weather's closed in again. We had a window today of about 4 hours. It's now white out, blizzard conditions outside. We had to stop and put the tent up. And what we intend doing now is just staying here for the night, and we intend continuing our descent tomorrow, final 3,000 feet, and hopefully tomorrow the weather will be a little bit better than it is at the moment.
And so it was. So the following morning we continued our descent. It was here, on the final 3,000 feet, that I came closest to disaster. I was really tired, and so I decided to traverse down a particularly steep slope. I began my descent when suddenly I heard Gary calling out. I thought I'd dropped something at first. As I turned round, the whole slope I had just covered was swept away by an avalanche. It was so close that it covered the back end of my skis, and it was completely quiet, not making a sound. I just sat there in the snow as the whole mountainside rushed off and disappeared over the edge of a 3,000-foot drop. As we made the final descent, both Gary and I were completely exhausted. Every turn was an effort. It was fortunate that we met with two of the porters who'd come up having seen the avalanche, and we were able to give them some of the kit we were carrying to lighten our loads. Despite this, the loads were still heavy, and we had yet to cross the crevasse field further down the slope. As we meandered our way down, I became more and more snowbound from the continual falls I was taking. The only thing I hoped was that I wasn't going to fall while crossing the crevasse field. Above us, the ridge that we'd spent 9 days sat at 20,000 feet on. It all seemed impossible at this point, that here we were making our way back down the slope. And it's amazing how small you can feel at times. Finally, Gary and I make it back down to the camp.
Oh, that was hard.
We're both exhausted,
That was hard.
we're dehydrated, and we've missed our food. We're both on the point of collapse.
Congratulations, Paul. Well done.
Thanks, Adrian.
However,
I'm getting
chai
slowly.
and a good meal, even if it is goat, soon perks us up. We're able to recount our stories with the porters.
6 days, very awesome.
6 days, 9 days, 9 days, 9 days.
9 days. Yeah, you were saying, Paul, you thought you'd been up there a long time. I mean,
9 days.
a long time.
It did. Well, the first day, I mean, getting up there in that storm and then putting the tents up and climbing in and expecting, you know, everybody said, oh, certainly Bob, the weather will clear, don't worry, it'll be fine. And the next day was miserable, and the next day was miserable, and then the next day I think was the day that it broke in the morning, and we managed to make it within 800 foot of the Shigri Parbat. Initially.
For everything you've done. Thanks very much, Gupta.
But it's not over yet. The following morning, we leave for Patel, some 65 kilometres away.
Safe climbing. Good climbing. And Adrian.
And while we exchange our goodbyes with sadness, we both face the prospect of walking back down the glacier with even greater trepidation.
Well,
Well, it's just over a month ago that we started out from this very spot at Patel. It seems a lot longer, actually. It's really a hell of a lot longer. We walked the 50 kilometres down from Shigri Parbat yesterday, arriving back at base camp about 10 o'clock. And then we set off at 6 this morning to do the 15 kilometres here. And my feet are feeling every one of those kilometres now. I think every one of those meters. But at the end of the day, apart from getting dark, it's been quite an experience. And the only thing I have to really reflect on is just how humble I feel when I see people like the porters who, carrying 40 kilos yesterday, wandered down the 50 kilometres without falling over, whereas myself and Gary falling over left, right and centre, carrying slightly less, probably about 70 pounds or 35 kilo. As I say, these people live on a diet of rice and dal, and having subsisted on rice and dal for just under a week, I don't know why they carry on living. That's the only one. Well, and that's the end of the story for myself and Gary, really. Apart from the fact that we're now going to eat for England, and if possible, probably drink for England as well. I had plastic surgery on my nose.